Hello, everybody. This is Andrei, and you are on the Marketing Innovation Podcast Show. Our special guest for today is Haynes, who is the founder and CEO of Thrive.com, the first and only Jobs to be Done software for product marketing and sales teams. And today we'll discuss about the importance of team alignment in promoting B2B and B2C products, as well as the Jobs to be Done method and how you can apply it within your business to increase your returns. So without further ado, hi, James. It's a pleasure to have you here. How are you? How's the day going?
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. So let's go. I guess, first of all, can you tell us a bit about your background and where you're coming from? Because you have an impressive background in entrepreneurship and leadership and marketing. So I think it would be really good to give our listeners here a bit of context into you as a person.
Yeah, sure. I hope it's an interesting story. So I started my career about 30 years ago when I graduated college. In the early 90s, right into a big recession. People don't remember that, but it was the big S&L crisis in the US. And so I really spent 10 years in the financial world, in the private equity industry, buying companies. And that was fairly interesting. And it was a great, business education. But basically back in the 1990s, you could buy companies and use a lot of debt and cut costs, which is still, a big chunk of the private equity industry today. But I was always interested in the innovation question. And we never did anything with the companies that was innovation at all in product or marketing. It was really financial engineering. In fact, one of the companies we bought was Steinway & Sons, the kind of famous piano company. And I always like to joke that Steinway is literally the least innovative company on the planet. They're making the same product they made 150 years ago, and they're selling the same product. So that got me interested in innovation. So I went back to business school and then worked in product management and really started to learn, okay, what's the state of art for product marketing and product management and innovation, which obviously leads to sales. And I started a couple companies that had some successes and failures. And then, so I spent that kind of next 10 years in the world of innovation, at big companies and startups, and really trying to figure out, okay, how does the world innovate? And I worked with, Sand Hill Road, Silicon Valley, investors and large companies, and there really just wasn't any good methods out there. There's nothing that's really scientific. And so that's when about a decade ago, I really got interested in jobs to be done in innovation. And I'd studied with Clay Christensen, who was a big proponent of jobs to be done and jobs theory. He passed away last year, unfortunately, but he's the famous Harvard Business School professor who talked a lot about disruption, which he's really known for. But really the last part of his career, he focused on jobs to be done innovation. And I got really interested in that because it's just more systematic way to think about product management and product marketing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, tell us how you got into Thrive. So maybe some of the businesses that you founded or you were part of in the more recent past, and then how these led you to funding Thrive.
Yeah, great. So I'll tell you kind of an interesting story about a company. I was actually brought in by the venture investors. The company had been struggling, and the idea was there's a big opportunity for what's happening in distributed networking. This was the era of Napster, and people kind of forget, unless you're as old as I am, that back then in the early 2000s, the cost of streaming anything over the internet, what we're doing right now, would be ridiculously expensive. You couldn't do it. So we looked at distributed networking, and we thought that we could come up with a device that would enable you to collect videos. Essentially, it was like a TiVo for web videos. Mm-hmm. Now, it was interesting that the company did okay, but was interesting. What happened after that was this other company launched called YouTube. And YouTube was obviously enormously successful. So that got me thinking, well, how did we not approach this correctly? What problem were we trying to solve for customers? And that's what we didn't really figure out. And that's whether you're a startup or a Fortune 500 company, really getting your team across product marketing and sales to agree on what problem you're solving for your customer. Obviously, that's the most important thing you can do. And that's what we should have done better, but I didn't have jobs to be done or jobs theory as a method back then. And that's what really got me interested in jobs theory and jobs to be done. And so I did work in this industry, around jobs to be done. And what it does is it creates a lot of data. Without a doubt, you're going to get a lot of customer data. And if you combine that customer data with like segmentation and market sizing and competitive analysis, and messaging analysis, et cetera, go to market planning, you get an enormous amount of data. And so about 7 years ago, that's when I started Thrive. Because if you're trying to make decisions with a lot of data, whether you're on a product team or a marketing team, software is very good at that. That's why, software exists, because there's so much data in the world and we all need to make decisions. So that's really how I started Thrive, was recognizing, okay, jobs to be done is a very effective method, and we can talk about, what it is and why. But it creates a lot of data. And the last thing product and marketing teams want is more PowerPoint presentations and Excel spreadsheets to email around, right? So we wanted to put this data together that could really coordinate product marketing and sales on the customer. And you can think about what Jobs to be Done does is it takes the phrase, being customer focused, which every company wants to be customer focused these days, which is a great thing. And whether you're a startup or Fortune 500 company, you need to be customer focused. Okay. But what does that mean? Well, starting with, you might have to get a lot of data about customers, and that's where Jobs to be Done come in. And then you want to keep that customer focus all through your product road mapping process that your product management teams are working on, all through your product marketing processes when your marketing teams are focused on messaging and go to market, et cetera, and even through to your sales team, especially if you're in the B2B world. You want to keep that customer in focus across those teams. And what's really interesting is you want to organize your company around your customer's job rather than around the functions of the company. And we can talk about that in more detail. But really, one of the things you can think about is what our software does is help keep teams focused on their customers.
Okay, that's a very good point. So going from here, let's discuss and explain to our listeners here what's the jobs to be done method. I think this would be the starting point, so that we can go into a couple of case studies and then talk the actual importance of having the teams aligned and the communications and planning different phases of communications and sales focused around the product map and journey. So jobs to be done.
Yeah, it's a great question. So for those who don't know what jobs to be done is, it's the core idea is actually deceptively very simple. It's that customers are actually not buying a product. You think you're selling them a product and they seem to be transacting, purchasing something. But what they're really doing underneath it is hiring that product to get a job done. And in today's innovation terminology, thanks in large part to Clay Christensen, we use the term jobs to be done to explain basically a goal that a customer has that's independent of any solution. And that's really the key, is that people, every customer is a real human who's trying to get through their day and, achieve goals. And so good examples of this are, you can look back at products that we've all used and we've all switched to new products. So for example, I'm old enough, I remember the days of records. When I used to listen to music on records, I actually had 8-track tapes. That was a horrible format. But, we all switched from records to CDs, and then we all switched from CDs to iPods, and we all switched from iPods to streaming services. So why did that happen? Well, if you use traditional definitions of a market, you would say, well, there was a huge iPod market. Apple sold 200 million iPods at $150 a pop. That's a $30 billion revenue opportunity. So companies also, they make this mistake all the time. They think the product is the market. And in fact, Microsoft made this mistake with the Zune. I don't know if you owned a Zune. Very few people did, because it was an iPod competitor. And they thought, well, there's a $30 billion iPod market. So let's make a Zune competitor. We're Microsoft. We have 1 billion customers. We have an operating system we can connect it to. Everybody will buy the Zune because they want to be on our Windows system. And of course, they sold 0 Zunes. They lost a huge amount of money in it. So what happened? Well, the customer's job is exactly the same. The job is to create a mood with music. And that job has never changed, and it will never change. It's very, very stable. And that's the power of the method, is that it gives you a stable target to hit, whether you're on a product marketing or sales team. And The reason that we switch to new products is because something comes along that gets the job done faster and more accurately. And, you can use tons of examples. Like we all use Apple and Google Maps today. But I'm old enough when I used to have like a paper map in my car and you would pull it out and you try to figure out where you're going, right? And the reason we switch these new apps, in that case, the job is to get to a destination on time. Again, it's never going to change. 100 years ago, getting to a destination on time was the same as 100 years from now. Now, what's really interesting is, sure, that's a high level statement, but how does that help you as a product team or a market team figure out what to do? So if you were to say, hey, we're going to help people get to the destination on time better than Apple and Google Maps, how do you figure that out? Well, that's the really hard question. And what's really interesting about the theory is that it shows that even what seems like a simple job, getting to a destination on time, for example, actually has over 100 different customer needs. And that is what is amazing. And the goal of every product marketing and sales team is to satisfy customer needs, better than competitors in the market. So even a job like get to a destination on time, we break it down. We call it job steps. And you can break it down into a series of job steps. And each one of those steps has variables. And that's really the key idea is you can figure out those variables and getting to a destination on time. And those things, obvious things like the address, the routes to the stops, the sequence of stops you're going to, where to find parking, when to make turns, et cetera. All those things are variables. And what you're looking for as a product or marketing team is which one of those things does your customers currently struggle with the most? And that's why we switch to new products, because we struggle to get the job done in some way, and then something comes along and it helps get the job done faster or more accurately. And that's the core of the theory.
Mm-hmm. So basically deconstructing the whole thing, like the job that you need to achieve, and then trying to shape your unique selling point around the current sort of barriers that a customer might have in the product that they're using at the moment. Like, for example, maybe you have Windows and you are not like a Windows computer and not very happy with something around it. And then you have the Mac, which is faster, easier to access stuff, more multimedia focused, etc., etc. And then you decide that would be for you because it appeals to something that you deconstructed from the main objective, which is, facilitating, let's say, working online or something like that.
Yeah, that's right. So let me give you a great example. There's a ton of, Apple examples. But let me give you an example of where if you were to let's say you were a marketing team and you were trying to beat Apple and Google Maps. Now, that would be a very, very hard thing to do because they have about 100% market share and their products are free. How would you even remotely come up with some marketing message and certainly even a feature in your product roadmap that would beat Apple and Google Maps? Well, in Jobs to be Done, the process of doing that would first be to understand the whole job of getting to a destination on time. Mm-hmm. And and people can see this on our website if they want to go look at all the needs. There's 106 needs in that job, which is really amazing. And the next thing you'd want to do is say, okay, well, where is a segment of the market that struggles to get to a destination on time? And this is also where jobs theory is really, really powerful, because if you do traditional profiling, which a lot of marketing teams do, they'll create personas. Mm-hmm. There's Joe and Kate who are male and female. One's rural or urban. They have high income, low income, high education, low education. They create these fictional characters. Mm-hmm. And those can be useful for some things. But if you're really trying to segment the market, in our example here of getting to a destination on time, to figure out who struggles, those personas may or may not be the reason why people struggle. It might not have anything to do with the fact that you're male or female. And we don't have to get into the details now, but there's very quantitative ways of doing this with jobs theory. And the way that we do it is we look for customer struggles and we run these quantitative surveys. And then we say, okay, well, who all struggles in the same way? And it turns out, we actually have data on this market, that getting to a destination on time, one of the most underserved parts of that job is a huge segment that cannot plan their stops to stay on time. And those are the people who have to do things like determine the optimal sequence of stops. So if you're a traveling professional or a salesperson or a rep or something, and you've got to go to customer meetings and you've got unknown locations and you've got to do that frequently, you are likely underserved in that market. So that's how we uncover unmet customer needs. And then now you can look at how are you going to message against Apple and Google? Well, first of all, what feature would you build? And in this case, you know, the need is to determine the optimal sequence of stops. That's a variable in the job. It's an action a customer has to take with a variable in a job step to plan the stops. And like the job itself, it's independent of any need. It doesn't mention AI or machine learning or VR or AR, like the hip technologies, blockchain. And the reason that's so important is you don't want to, if you're going to build a feature that might use some interesting technologies like machine learning, you build that so that it helps the customer determine the optimal sequence of stops in this example. And then your messages would be around the functional thing the customer is trying to do, which is get to destinations on time, fast and accurately, and determine the optimal sequence of stops and the emotions that they're going to feel. So you want to take people from feeling anxiety about getting the job done to feeling confidence. Mm-hmm. And that's really important in marketing messages too. It's like you've got to get the functional job done, but you've got to get people to believe that they're going to have this change in emotional state. Because if you're a busy professional, you're trying to get to these meetings that matter to your career, that's anxiety inducing. So your messages shouldn't be, hey, we have the latest machine learning algorithms, because frankly, no customer cares about machine learning algorithms. What they care about is that you help them get the job done faster and more accurately. So, that's in a nutshell, the process. There's a lot there, I know, to unpack, but the basic idea is you can focus on the job, the independent customer needs that have nothing to do with the features, and that have nothing to do with the product, and then message to getting the job done faster and more accurately.
Mm-hmm. Super. So if it's okay with you, I think it would be really cool if we could talk some practical examples here also from the B2B space, because mainly nowadays, like from some of the more recent case studies that we were involved with, they were around the SaaS products and software, which is a massive market in the UK, has been booming for a while, but not only here. So what we saw was that, the product was launching. This was happening a lot in startups when you have a new platform or you have a new software, typically SaaS, and then you launch it and then you have the product team and the marketing and the sales, outbound sales, full on trying to sell, then marketing trying to build a lead generation funnel and the inbound marketing side of things. And then the product wanting to push new features, wanting the sort of marketing around the product as well, which many times can be a bit different because it goes many times to customers as well as new potential customers. And in this whole process, mainly if it's a fast growing startup, things can get misaligned, or feedback from somewhere like sales might not come or arrive in due time in the product team in order to be incorporated in a product map and then pushed through for development and stuff like that. So it would be really interesting for the people here that might be part of such teams in such businesses to discuss some of the ways that maybe some of your clients with Thrive or Thrive in itself can solve these problems in this modern, highly competitive market scenario.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great question. And we do a lot of work with B2B companies. And one of the reasons is Jobs to be Done is great for markets that are very complex. One of the things you can think about the method is it helps you take complexity and make it manageable. And B2B markets are very, very complex. So the way that we generally start this, which is super important, is who is the B2B customer? And we see this a lot, that teams, product marketing, sales team don't really agree on who the customer is. And that's such an interesting problem to solve. And we separate customers into three different categories. The most important customer is the job beneficiary. That is the person who benefits from getting the job done. And in B2B markets, a lot of times it's the executive, because you've got, whether it's you're targeting CFOs or operating officers or CEOs or VPs of marketing or finance or sales or whatever it is, in a B2B, in specific industries as well, you've got to figure out who benefits from getting this job done, right? And then you've got to figure out, of course, what is the job? What is your customer's goal? What are they trying to achieve? And the second type of customer is the job executor. And the job executor is important. It's some human who is helping the job beneficiary get the job done. Now, let me give you some great examples because you mentioned SaaS. And B2B has seen a huge change in the past 10, 20 years in the type of customers you would target. So before SaaS applications, what did you do as a business customer? Well, you had an IT department and you had IT managers who set up your servers. And if you were going to install Siebel as your CRM or other ERP systems, you had on-premise, on-site, software that you would get installed. And that was the huge industry. You remember the big professional services firms they were generating billions of dollars a year just installing software, right? So their customer was an IT manager. So what happened in that market? Well, the IT manager, the job executor went away because who benefits from SaaS applications? Well, in CRM, it's obviously salespeople. So what do salespeople have to do today to use these SaaS applications? They go to a web page and they log in. That's it. No IT manager, no executor. And this happens in every single market. So the first thing for any B2B team is to really understand who your customer is, because we work with a lot of companies and they're targeting job executors, which is a huge risk because someone is going to come along and create a product where the job beneficiary doesn't need a job executor to get the job done. Let me give you another example in a medical market because this seems even crazier. You've probably had your blood drawn, right? Whether it's, for a physical or your, health test, or you need some sort of sample to diagnose you or something. And you go to a person called a phlebotomist. And a phlebotomist is, of course, a very highly trained professional who knows how to, stick your arm with a needle and make sure, nothing goes wrong. And the job there is to obtain a blood sample. And obviously, you, as the person who's trying to optimize your health, obtaining a blood sample, you're the beneficiary, right? The phlebotomist is just executing the job. Mm-hmm. We worked with a company called 7sense, and they've built the device where a patient can take their own blood, which seems totally terrifying, right? I'm not a needle guy, but I understand the fears. And so you stick this thing on your arm and it's got a micro needle array and it's almost painless. So it creates a vacuum and it sucks blood. So even in that case, even that kind of extreme, highly trained professional job, the job executor is going to go away. And as a patient, you can draw your own blood. There's so many examples of this. So in B2B markets, first thing is figure out who the customer is. The next thing is what really is the job? What level of abstraction are you focused on? Because every business exists to create equity value. You could just say the whole job domain for business is to create equity value. Now, you've got other stakeholders, of course, and companies are recognizing they have stakeholders, including their employees and the communities they work in. But the way that our system is set up in the world today, if you're CEO or board and you're not generating revenue and profitability growth, you're going to get fired, right? That's just the way business works. But you have to break that down into different jobs according to the function within the company, whether it's finance, operations, sales, product, marketing, whatever, or within your specific industry. Is it, travel and entertainment? Is it, aviation, manufacturing, consumer packaged goods, finance, whatever. And within those functions in industry, there are the jobs that you should be targeting. And that's the key to the start of the business-to-business jobs to be done journey.
Mm-hmm. Okay. It just occurred to me. I know we didn't discuss about this before, so it would be interesting to see some insights from here, if you can share, of course. But how did you use this when you launched Thrive, or through the growth that you guys saw?
Yeah, that's great. And it's a great question. We are building Thrive on Thrive using jobs to be done. Not surprising. Out here in California, we like to say we're eating our own dog food, as the saying goes. Mm-hmm. And that's really what we recognize is a few things. That product teams really struggle to prioritize their roadmap. The product teams, companies have tons of feature ideas, whether it comes from the product team, the marketing team, or the sales team, or customer requests. How do you focus? What in your product roadmap is going to lead to success? So how do you launch things that from a product team's perspective, that your marketing team can successfully market and your sales team can sell. So that's what we looked at. We were like, okay, we have to help improve this process because most products fail. It really is extraordinary in today's day and age. Of course, you still have this incredibly high failure rate for products, and certainly for new products, but even for new product features. And the other thing is that product and marketing teams miss competitive threats all the time. People forget that BlackBerry's market cap was 4 times Apple's. BlackBerry was 4 times bigger than Apple when the iPhone launched. So they had a roadmap and they thought they were on a path to continued growth. And yet now they're basically worth zero today. I mean, effectively the company, I think they're still a business, but they, effectively lost $80 billion in market cap. So that's what we realized. We were like, how can we help teams look into their roadmap and say, we're on a path to generate revenue growth? How do you tie your roadmap to your revenue? And that's also a big risk equation for product and marketing teams, because the real dollars that get spent and put at risk are when you start developing a product and you're going to market and you're going to sell it. That's extremely expensive. So you're taking your company's capital, even if you're a startup. This is what we like to say to startups too. You should do this work before you write one line of code or engineer, the first thing that you're going to manufacture. You should do all this work because it's much less expensive and it lowers your risk dramatically to really understand your customer's job and where they struggle before you risk that capital. So when you start investing that, and this happens certainly at bigger companies too, where you're spending, hundreds of millions, potentially billions of dollars in your roadmap, you have no visibility. Is that really going to generate revenue? BlackBerry thought it was going to. Obviously, it didn't. So that's like the way we like to think about it.
Super. And going back to when we were discussing about the sales, marketing, and product team alignment, maybe if we can, or if you have in mind any examples of startups that you are working with that were using maybe Thrive as well as other project management tools, and how maybe either they were working with both and that was helping them accelerate their decision making and processes, or whether they chose Thrive for a particular reason. Because, just for clarity here, I know that many people on the show might be using stuff like Asana and Trello and, all these, tools, like mainstream ones. But I was curious and I want you to maybe shine a bit of light in terms of the differences between something like Thrive and Jobs to be Done and other project management tools.
Yeah, that's great. And I think they're trying to do different things. So, and we work with companies that are working with all the different, product management and project management tool, whether it's Asana, AHA, Jira, et cetera, Microsoft Team Foundation Server. And the way that you can think about it is the output of Jobs to be Done is the input into those tools. Because let's use Jira example. They're obviously, kind of one of the biggest tools that people are using, or whether it's Asana. You could do anything with those tools. They're kind of like a blank spreadsheet, right? You could type in, whatever you want in your sprint to try and achieve, or whatever you're trying to get done in a project management, tool. What we do is actually the work even before that. You can think of it as sometimes it's called the very front end of innovation, is really figuring out from your customer's perspective, what are you going to build? But also, more importantly, why? Why are you going to build that? So if you have product ideas and you're putting them into these other tools, that's okay. That's great. Ideas are wonderful. But sometimes we like to joke, we have no product ideas because what we're looking at is the problem the customer has first and foremost, even before coming up with ideas. And so that's how you can really differentiate those tools from, Thrive and Jobs to be Done in general, is that Jobs to be Done is saying, okay, independent of any products or solutions or technologies, before you try and evaluate machine learning or AI or blockchain or whatever it is, let's figure out what the customer is struggling with. And that's really the most important decision a company can make, is are they in the right market where there are unmet needs, where customers are willing to pay for new solutions, especially for a startup, right? Because the market decision you make, and remember, we define markets from the point of view of the customer and the job they're trying to get done, not the product like the iPod. And if you do that, if you pick the right market, that is half the battle, maybe even more. Sequoia, I love this story. Don Valentine, who was the founder of Sequoia, famously invested in this little company called Apple and this, kind of crazy, unkempt hippie named Steve Jobs. And everybody thought, oh, wow, they were such pioneers for investing in this crazy hippie who eventually became this kind of visionary product leader and innovator. But if you listen to what Sequoia and Don Valentine had said about what they were investing in, they were investing in the market. It wasn't Steve Jobs at all. It was the fact that currently, when Apple launched, this is the late 1970s, computers cost $25,000 to $250,000. And Steve Jobs said, hey, look, I can make this computer. It costs $2,500. And they knew that computers were really useful tools. And Don Valentine said, we were investing in that market. It just happened to be Steve Jobs was in this really incredibly important market. And that is true for every company. So those other tools are great, once you've made that decision about what market and what customer and what unmet needs you're going to satisfy and what your product strategy should look like. But you still need to make that decision. That's the most important decision you can make as an entrepreneur or as a Fortune 500 company.
Mm-hmm. So, for example, Thrive or the jobs to be done method, my feeling is that we can refer to either because they are, doing kind of the same thing, which is finding the actual job that needs to be done. So, would be using it and how often in order for it to be effective? Because, as it happens at the innovation stage and not the implementation stage, kind of where something like Jira or Asana would come into place. My feeling, but this is just from our discussion so far, is that this thing should be managed by only the management team and also not being reviewed, or the decisions that are made on the basis of the insights here should not be changed on a very constant basis in order to allow, sprints to happen or the implementation time to happen. So, what, in your opinion, would be a healthy way of applying this method into a business?
Yeah, that's great. So, that is a really great question. So the way that we think about it is we know what's not going to change. So what doesn't change? And that is your customer's job. If their parents trying to get a baby sleep through the night, or their consumers trying to get to a destination on time, or a cardiovascular surgeon trying to restore artery blood flow, or if your sales team trying to acquire customers, whatever the job is, that is not going to change. And figuring out which segment in that market is underserved is incredibly important as well. And the products and services will change. So some of that, the unmet needs will get satisfied, so that might change. But when you have that stability in what you're focused on, that's how you can coordinate your product strategy across your product marketing and sales team. So the way that we think about it is you actually should have everybody from your product marketing and sales team, because those teams are customer focused. If they're not, you're in big trouble. They should be customer focused. I mean, your operations team can make your operations more efficient and cut your costs. Your finance team has to deal with your finance. But your product marketing and sales team are your customer focused teams. That means that everybody across those organizations should, one, agree on who your customer is, what their job is, what are the unmet needs, what segment are you targeting, and that creates your product strategy. So it's interesting. If you walk around companies, we do this all the time. Everybody agrees that product marketing sales teams, that the mission is to satisfy unmet customer needs better than competitors. And people say, yes, of course, that's why we're in business. And then we ask, well, what does a customer need? And no one agrees on that. So that's a huge problem. So that's why we want to bring these three teams together, because everybody should agree on that. And then the next thing we ask is, you need to have a good product strategy, right? In order to build, market, and sell your products. And they'll say, yes, we need great product strategy. And then we ask, okay, what is your product strategy? And teams, they don't even agree on what their product strategy is. They can't simply articulate their product strategy. So everybody at your company on the customer facing teams should be able to say, what a customer need is, what customer needs you're targeting, and what your product strategy is. And that's why, and that's a very hard thing to do. I'm not trying to be flippant about this. That is very, very difficult. And that's why we started Thrive. So to help teams through this process of agreeing on it. So whatever's changing on your product side, and it will change because there's new technology. You want to constantly be launching features. That's the whole idea of a roadmap, is that you're going to do things in the short and medium and long term that focus on your customer. But you really want to understand and empathize with your customer. And that's very difficult to do because customer problems are very complex. Like I mentioned with getting to a destination on time, there's 106 needs. So you've got to constantly be going back to that data when you're making this downstream decisions, whether you're an engineer, making trade-off decisions on the feature requirements, or whether you're a marketing team member who's making analysis of your competitors' messaging, or trying to figure out your messaging, or why aren't you generating as many leads as you should be, or you're a sales team. And we do a lot of sales team training where we're trying to get the sales team not to just sell their features and their product, but first to empathize with where that customer is struggling, so that then when they tell the customer, here's how we can solve your problems, that's a much more believable story because they understand the jobs and the unmet needs.
Mm-hmm. Tricky question. How do you feel about this past year? Because from what we saw from the marketing front, but I bet it's the same in sales and product as well, and like in almost every business, the needs of the customers have maybe not changed exactly, but surely been altered in a way or another. So most likely using something like this would, on a constant basis as we progress through the pandemic, would have been a very good health check in order to see whether what we are promoting is still, the value proposition that the customers are looking for. So what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, what a crazy year, huh? We've talked about this a bunch, actually. What's really interesting is, of course, there's some situations where you just need insurance. You need government help, and part of the role of government is to be a big insurance provider. And if you're a retail restaurant, you just got shut down. I mean, that's just really hard to deal with that. Or if you're a B2B provider who's trying to sell to restaurants, obviously you've been hit by an extraordinary event that hopefully won't happen again anytime soon. But then if you look at the jobs that, especially B2B markets, that businesses still need to get done, what happened was the jobs are actually exactly the same, but we saw a huge shift in platforms in the way people get the job done. Mm-hmm. And let me give you a very, very concrete example, because we're sitting here on a Zoom call today, and we talked about this even before the pandemic, which is, who actually is your competitor in a B2B market? And we would use Zoom and United Airlines as an example. And people would say, oh, those are two totally different industries. There's web conferencing industry, and then there's airlines. Those are just completely different products, different technologies. They seem nothing alike. How could they possibly be competitors? Well, if you use jobs theory, you can look at that and say, well, they're both helping salespeople acquire customers. So acquiring customers is a job to be done, of course. It's a B2B job to be done, and there's lots of different solutions to do it. And two of those different platforms to acquire customers, one is an airline and airports. So you use that platform, you hop on a plane to go talk to customers. The other is web conferencing, video conferencing. And we were saying, even before the pandemic, when Zoom used to be worth, its market cap used to be kind of equivalent to the airlines, even though it had much smaller revenue, it was still, the potential growth. And we would say airlines should be buying these web conferencing companies. And the reason is that some of their most valuable customers are salespeople who pay, full fare to get on a flight at last minute to go close the deal, talk to a customer. And if the airlines lose those customers because now salespeople can get the job done by using Zoom, then they're in real trouble. Mm-hmm. And so to answer your question about this last year, what I think happened was it accelerated trends that were already there in some markets. Now, some markets just need to be helped, like, restaurants and, retailers, and small businesses, et cetera. But in other cases, it accelerated the trends. And I'd make a prediction. I don't really like to make too many predictions, but I would predict that For enterprise sales, you're never going to get back to the percentage of salespeople that get on planes to close deals as you had pre-pandemic. It's just never coming back because people recognize that Zoom is a very good way. It's more efficient. It's not as taxing on your body. We've all probably traveled a lot, where you're in different time zones and people really want to get back to their kids and see their family and instead of spending time away. So I think there's so many benefits to that kind of accelerated change. Now, the airlines don't like it because they're going to lose very valuable customers. But if you look at it, it's the exact same reason that we switched from records to iPods to streaming services. If the solution can get the job done faster and more accurately, people will adopt it. Customers will adopt it. And so I think the pandemic just accelerated that change that was already happening.
Mm-hmm. Super. Thanks a lot. Yes, I agree with that. I think it also left room for, because you are coming from that spot, innovation, and it's always the case, in times like this. Although personally, I haven't lived too many yet, but I know historically this is how it happened. So let's see what this year brings, I guess. But until next time, what I wanted to ask you while we have people still here on the show is, who are your ideal customers for Thrive? Maybe there's a couple of businesses here that could use this, and I'm sure you sparked the interest of many. And I know for a fact that this is one thing that would bring a lot of value into multiple startups that we worked with, where we had to actually support in identifying something that should have already been there very clear, which is, the unique selling points, the end customer, what are we selling, and this very important bit that we discussed about, which is what's the actual job that gets done by using the software product, etc. So who is the user of Thrive?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we do have customers, anybody that are tiny startups all the way to, Fortune 50 companies. And we would say the ideal customer is just broadly teams who really want to be customer focused. And there's different, and especially in startups, there's different types of entrepreneurs. Some are just, really focused on technology, which is fine. Some have the problem themselves. I think those are probably the best entrepreneurs. They're so frustrated with something, they start a company to solve a problem that they have. And that's effectively a way of doing jobs to be done, right? You're so frustrated with the job yourself that you're going to start a company to solve the problem. So broadly, it's teams, product marketing and sales teams that really want to be customer focused. And I will also say that the companies and teams that we work with usually find themselves in some sort of situation. And those situations generally they're struggling to succeed. So they haven't hit their revenue numbers. They really projected, some sort of revenue numbers. It's not coming to fruition. Or they've got a competitor who's entering the market. They can't really figure out their competitor. Or they're really trying to solve what's in the startup world, it's what's known as product market fit, right? They haven't really gotten that together. They keep launching features and they keep thinking that the next phase is, going to be their growth phase, and it just doesn't turn into growth. And that's such an interesting question. We could probably do a whole nother show on product market fit. But what does that mean? And how do you solve that problem? And we work with a broad range of companies. We like working with startups too, because we want them to succeed. And if you look, the odds are stacked against any startup. And if you look at venture returns, right, almost every startup fails. In fact, the entire venture industry, Bill Solomon from Harvard Business School published data on this, that if you didn't have the outside returns of, the Googles and Twitters and Facebooks of the world, the entire venture asset class wouldn't be worth investing in. You'd be better off in investing in the S&P 500. And for a lot of venture funds, you would be, because they don't have great returns. And from an entrepreneur standpoint, that's really disheartening, because your chance of succeeding at a startup is almost zero. I mean, the number of startups that succeed is incredibly small. And so the odds are kind of stacked against you. And we really like helping those entrepreneurs who want to succeed and not just fail fast and pivot, right? I mean, those are kind of terms that startups hear all the time is you should fail fast and you should pivot, and you should get your minimum viable product out the door. I think those terms and that thinking leads entrepreneurs astray. And the reason why is you want to reduce your risk of failure. You don't want to keep failing, and you don't even want to launch a minimum viable product. I think that is the wrong phrase. You should launch a minimum valuable product because your product has to be valuable to customers. Viability is not a criteria these days. You and I could sit here and write some software code and fire up some Amazon servers, and we'd have an app or a piece of software. It'd be viable. We could absolutely, it's not hard to create technology these days. We could even manufacture something pretty easily. So both in software and hardware, it's pretty easy to do that. Something can be viable. It will work. But is it valuable? Was any customer going to care that it gets some job done for them? And that is what you should look at, is that viability, not viability, but the value you're delivering even before you invest in development. So those are generally the teams that we work with, where they really want to solve these problems. They want to be customer focused, and they've got some sort of situation where they want to do a better job.
Mm-hmm. Very insightful and very true as well. So you guys, you must know that Jay also has a history of successful investments as well as, being a successful entrepreneur. So I think this was also a bit of the investor talking, but very good advice indeed. Okay, so for you guys interested in Thrive and Jay's ventures, we'll have all the links in the description of the episode below. Jay, if people want to connect maybe personally with you or discuss potential partnerships and things like this, where is it best for them to reach out to you?
Yeah, great. I'm pretty easy to find. Jay Haynes, JayHaynes. You can find me on LinkedIn or certainly through Thrive at thrv.com.
Super. Sounds good. Okay. So guys, as always, thanks so much for joining us. Hopefully you found this episode as insightful and useful as I did. And Jay, thank you so much again for being on the show. Really nice to meet you. And hopefully we'll repeat this. I really like your point on product market fit. I think we didn't have the chance yet to explore that in depth on the show. So maybe we can talk about the next episode. And guys, as well.
Great.
Guys, as well, if you have any questions for us, like for Jay and I, or you'd like us to discuss on something more specifically and you feel that would be valuable for your business, hit us up, either us at hello@marketiu.com or Jay, and we'll try to make that happen. But until next time, Jay, it was a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for being here. And guys, as always, keep rocking it, and we'll see you on the next episode. Have fun.